4.1 On the Conscious Fraud. According to this framework, Xavier purposely produced all the work and made pastiche to create the work from Group 2 specifically. Pastiche is a technique that depends on previous and daily reading of the authors to be imitated, requiring the patient effort of elaboration, retouching, and polishing of the achieved production, all of this done in time-consuming attempts. To be the real author of his work, Xavier would also have had to possess a rare talent to create unpublished work in prose, poetry, and various other types of texts of a different nature. Nonetheless, some highly renowned and influential writers expressed their doubts regarding Xavier making pastiche. The Brazilian writer R. Magalhães Jr., for instance, wrote an article for a newspaper in 1944 saying that to produce Xavier's work, he would have to have a good background of culture and an exceptional cognitive gift, among others. Whoever reads for 60 days, night and day, day and night, only Euclides da Cunha will write in the style of Euclides without notable effort, without making very hard mental gymnastics. The same thing happens to those who read Machado de Assis and those who read Castro Alves. The more personal the writer, the easier he can be imitated. But imitation undoubtedly requires qualities of intelligence, a good background of culture, logic in choosing the issues and in exposing ideas, in short, a certain awareness of literary, and I say this speaking only of intentional imitation, which is argued against Mr. Francisco Candido Xavier, Chico Xavier, and for these same reasons, I declare that if Chico Xavier is a liar, he is a liar of talent. For a man who only attended primary school, his vocabulary wealth is surprising. His facility for imitating would be an exceptional gift, because he doesn't just imitate Humberto de Campos, but also Antero de Quintal, Alfonso de Guimarães, Artur Azevedo, Antonio Nobre, etc. Whoever denies Chico Xavier as a medium will be praising him as a pastiche maker. In this perspective, Monteiro Lobato said, "If the man Chico Xavier really produced everything that comes from poetry from beyond the grave on his own, then he can be at any Academy of Letters and Arts, occupying as many seats as he wants." According to the critic Agrippino Grieco, it would be challenging to take the pastiche technique so far. His comment was based on a poem attributed to the poet Augusto dos Anjos and to a letter attributed to his friend De Campos and addressed to him. Both texts were psychographed in 1939 in front of Grieco, who signed the blank sheets before the Psychographic Act to make sure Xavier made no fraud. The critic did not venture an explanation for the writing of the medium, but found that the language of the letter, unmistakably, was De Campos's, and the poem expressed well the thought and form of Augusto dos Anjos. The writer Afonso Schmidt also commented on the chronicles attributed to De Campos. I've always been a reader of Humberto de Campos. For years, attracted by the rumor being made, I also tried to read some chronicles attributed to him by Francisco Candido Xavier, that young, modest, and illiterate store clerk in a small town in Minas Gerais. I observed the following: fantasy, fraternal understanding of life, and good taste in composition are the same that characterize the work of our illustrious patrician. Until then, these are innate faculties that, by any chance, could be brought from the cradle by Francisco Xavier. The same, however, could not happen with culture, correctness, clarity, the particular way of feeling, of writing, of communicating one's impression to the reader, finally his personality, his attitude towards life, his silences, elements of success that Humberto de Campos achieved in 40 years of incessant practice of literature. And the boy from Minas Gerais, showing such virtues, could not improvise what artists everywhere do not bring from the cradle, and which is the most difficult to achieve, The physician Dr. Melo Teixeira in turn claimed that for Xavier's work be considered pastiche, it would be necessary to improvise culture, erudition, and knowledge, an impossible task. But let such wonder be admissible. Style is imitated. The technique of the verse, the preferred rhyme, the shake of the sentence, the choice of vocabulary, the appearance and nature of the images. But what about the manifestations of culture, of erudition, in the most diverse subjects that the context reveals? Can this also be imitated, improvised? How to explain within the imitation of style the right and adequate citations of dates and historical facts, of events and personalities, the explanatory purposes of the theme, the references, comparisons, and scientific, critical, philosophical, literary concepts, which only a ballast of varied knowledge, sedimented and systematized in time allow and only dominated by previous readings and studies, duly meditated. To improvise culture, erudition, knowledge, is to believe in spontaneous generation of wisdom. It is to conceive of congenital or hereditary scholarship. No, the subconscious receives, registers, accumulates, and reproduces, faithful or deformed, but only what has passed through the critical door of consciousness. It does not create from anything. Knowledge is not improvised. One gets. It is precisely the aspect of erudition, the disclosure of knowledge, which stands out most, far above the style and in the cultural molds of the author, as in the posthumous work of Humberto de Campos, as in the poetry of Augusto dos Anjos. Xavier's production caused so much curiosity and disbelief that alternative explanations, also based on fraud, were raised by a Roman Catholic group. Impressed by the contrast between texts psychographed by the medium and his lifestyle, the group suggested a conspiracy in which a commission of writers oversaw the confection of poems in absolute secrecy. Xavier would then play the role of an ignorant person with no time or culture to write the poems. However, this idea has no evidence at all to back it up. Regarding the production of the letters from Group 3, Xavier would need to have had access to thousands of pieces of detailed and private information about the deceased and their families to be considered a scammer. For that, he would need to count on the help of a network of informants and memorize all that information. In many cases, however, the information was unknown to the family, becoming known only when family members performed painful research and confirmed with amazement the data provided by the messages. Although most of the letters produced by Xavier were never published, some of them, along with an extensive investigation, can be seen in Life's Triumph. This work was produced by Paolo Severino, a team of 4 medical doctors and 1 engineer who followed Xavier for almost 20 years. Based on interviews and documentation analysis, these letters provided examples of objective information that convinced recipients that the author was the deceased to whom they were attributed. According to the study, what is remarkable about these communications, provided by Chico Xavier's mediumship, is their impressive accuracy concerning the fidelity of identifying information about relatives and friends still alive or already deceased who were part of the communicator's relationship. Furthermore, there are cases in which the spirit, when writing through the medium, uses personal expressions and even slang that he used when alive. More recently, Rocha and collaborators published a thorough study about a set of 13 letters, all attributed to the same deceased, that contained objectively verifiable information. By conducting interviews with one of the deceased's sister and friends, the authors measured the accuracy of the information and the estimated probability of the medium's access to this information through ordinary means. The authors found that 98% of the information, out of 99 total pieces of information, was accurate and true. The same group published a study case investigating a letter attributed to José Roberto Pereira da Silva, Appendix A, from which all the identified pieces of verifiable information were assessed as true and accurate. The letter contained, for instance, birth dates and other personal data, which the family was adamant they had not told Xavier. Notably, the letter also contained some data classified as leak scale 0 by the researchers. That is very specific information that was unknown by relatives or friends of the deceased, or information that was a secret held by a friend or relative and never revealed. In both articles, the authors concluded that such an amount of accurate personal details could not be obtained by ordinary means. The fraud hypothesis further lacks foundation to explain the letters from Group 3 because the medium did not know the recipients of the messages in the vast majority of the cases. There were no computers or internet to search for people's personal details, and their lives were never highlighted in any newspapers or magazines. Instead, the psychographed letters were obtained in open public sessions with hundreds of people after an 8-hour period of brief conversation with the family, if ever. This hypothesis is also weakened by the many years of Xavier's visual impairment, which led him to retirement. Another point to be considered to assume that Xavier was the real author of his work is that to produce texts with distinct intellectual demands, he should have spent a different amount of time in each of them. Following the logical reasoning, texts that demanded more intellectual skills would require more time to be produced, whereas texts with less intellectual elaboration would require less. As noted, however, this was not the case. Xavier was able to move from prose to verse, from the page of fiction to that of philosophy or morals, in instant elaboration and writing, without even seconds of meditation to coordinate ideas. Furthermore, Xavier would have to simulate for over 70 years that he produced these texts through psychography and public statements. While one might imagine the desire to gain notoriety as a religious leader, it is unreasonable to assume that someone with so many talents would decide to be a fraudster and deceive millions of people. After all, if he had all these skills, why did he not accept copyrights for his own books? In any case, the conjunction of such improbable and complex requirements is highly doubtful.